Well, welcome everyone to this introductory webinar on mobility as a service in Belgian cities. Thanks for the enthusiasm because we had 55 registrations for this session and more than 120 for the next one, so that shows that there was some enthusiasm. As my colleague just said in the chat, the microphones are cut for everyone, but in case you have questions, just feel free to shoot in the chat and we'll try to answer them. And if you have technical questions, feel free to reach out to Pauline and she will help you with this. Just for your information, the recording will also be available after the webinar. To start a bit, to tell you about why we decided to conduct that research. So as we know, there are numerous challenges linked to mobility and the intensive use of cars. So these are environmental challenges such as the pollution related to CO2 emission, economic challenges, for example, related to the economic impact of traffic jams, but also health challenges such as linked again to pollution, but also to obesity and social challenges. We all know that there are these kind of challenges present, and that's also why we need to develop intermodality and multimodality. So just to remind, intermodality is the fact to take different modes during the same journey, and multimodality means taking different means of mobility for the same journey, but at a different moment. These are quite well-known challenges. And we know that habits need to change, but why don't they always change? Well, there are a number of barriers that have been identified to the change of mobility behaviors, some that are related to fact, other to perception, some at the collective level, and other at the individual level. So facts are really what can be proved and that is seen, whereas perception is something that is felt and seen and is not always justified. And this graph is really important because it really explains a lot of the barriers. So to illustrate a bit more, a fact at the individual level, so either personal financial capacities, but also complex lifestyles. If I have a child that I have to pick up at the kindergarten and then I have to go to the gym and then to go for groceries, I might have not the opportunity to take something else in my car. Something individual level that is a perception is, for example, self-efficacy, or it will take me more time to take 2 buses than stay in my car. Also some moral norms and identity. Oh yes, but when I see people biking, I don't want to look like the way they are. So that's, you identify yourself against what you don't want to be. A perception at the collective level. We see, for example, that there's still quite a high status related to nice cars. So if you have a nice car, that means that you made it in life. And to finish, at the collective level, a fact, policies or taxes or infrastructure. If I live in the countryside where there's low density of people, I won't have access to public transport, so I won't be able to use these ones. So these are really important because it really shows that at the moment, the barriers to the change in mobility behaviors are really systemic and touches upon a lot of dimensions. And we've seen over the last year that smart mobility innovations were often put forward as a solution. So the main 4 trends that I often mention are electrification, the sharing of mobility, connectivity, and automation. I don't have the time today to go over through all of them, but we released a practical handbook last year on the topic, so I'm more than happy to send it to you. But one specific topic that often comes back when talking about this smart mobility innovation is MaaS. So we've seen over the last few years that there are MaaS pilots project, big European MaaS fundings happening. We also see, I mean, in my situation, I've not been to an event on smart mobility for the last 3 years where MaaS was not mentioned. And so at some point, we started wondering, what about the situation in Belgium? So we have seen that MaaS is mentioned in regional strategies. We've seen in the coalition agreement published in October that MaaS is also mentioned. But what about the cities? So through our informal contacts, we could see that some cities, such as the city of Antwerp, were quite advanced on the topic and really well aware, while other cities did not even understand exactly what it meant and how it could help them. So we have decided to look further into this. So the purpose of today's webinar and the report that was released today is threefold. So first, we want to demystify the concept of MaaS and major issues related to its governance and management. We want to make a first assessment of the interest and the perception of mobility representative of Belgian cities when it comes to MaaS and its implementation, management, and governance. And I really insist on this because the aim of this webinar is to offer an information and discussion basis for public authorities or MaaS stakeholders in general, but really focusing on governance and management because that is what we do at the Smart City Institute. And I also want to even push a bit further, saying that giving the list of attendees, I've seen that there are different audiences with probably different expectations, some that are not familiar with MaaS and some that are really familiar with MaaS. So I really want to insist that in this webinar and the report, we really want to make a first assessment and not revolutionize the governance and management of MaaS, but just to lay the basis. So first, what is MaaS? Well, there are different definitions, but we have decided to focus on this one because it's been widely accepted in the academic sector. So mobility as a service can be defined as a user-centric, intelligent, integrated system of information, reservation, purchase, and validation of tickets for mobility services. So it implies the integration of all mobility services on the territory, public transport, but also shared mode, such as car sharing, carpooling, bicycles, and so on, either private or public. To put it in a, let's say, a less academic way, you can see here on the graph that the idea of MaaS is that currently you have different title of transport for every mode you have. So you have your, for example, your Mobit card that you often use for different kind of public transport, but you also have to get some cash if you get a taxi. You have a separate app if you want an e-scooter. So the aim of MaaS is really to put that through a single platform that mostly is often represented through an app. There are different levels of integration of MaaS. So level 0, when there's no integration, it's basically an example that often comes back is Uber. So that means that in your Uber app, you can only get information and book your Uber cab. Level 1 is the integration of information. So that means that you can compare the different modes that you have around, and it guarantees the right information. So, for example, what is widely known is the case of Google Maps. If you go from one point to another, it will give you the different options that you have. The second, level 2, is the integration of booking and payment. So in addition to the information, you get the opportunity to book your individual journey in this. And this is, for example, what Trafi is doing. And if I'm correct, I saw that someone in the audience is from Trafi, so hi. And level 3 is the integration of services. So that means that at this point, not only can you book individual journeys, but you pay for a pass or a monthly ticket that will give you access to different services. So, for example, if you pay 50 euros, you'll have access to public transport without limit, and then access to some shared bags and so on. But if you pay, that's for example the case in Helsinki where WIM operates, you'll pay 400 or 500 euros and you'll have access to all the mobility services without restriction on your territory, and even be able to book a few cars for the weekend. Level 4, that is actually not in place at the moment, not really well developed, is the idea of including societal goals in it. So let's imagine that if you'd get some points that you could spend in local shops if you use more sustainable mode through the app. We can see three main management models and governance models related to it: the private, the public management model, or the hybrid one. In the private, it's basically a commercial entity that operates its platform in different cities and manages services. So they do the front end, so the app, but also the back end, everything related to data and the integration of services. From a governance point of view, that means that we govern by enabling or by laissez-faire, a private entity. In the public models, that is the public authority or the public transport operators that develop the platform and manages service, front end or back end. So in this case, we often say that in terms of governance, authorities govern by doing. And the last model is the hybrid models, where a private MaaS operator proposes a franchise model to an authority or public transport operator. So in a really public-private partnership model that is governing by making do. And it's, by example, what is done in Berlin. These three models are really, say, theoretical in the way that no matter which one you choose, a lot of stakeholders in academia and research, but also, let's say, more practical stakeholders put forward that it cannot happen without the involvement of public transport operator and public authorities, because public transport are often considered the backbone of MaaS, and the collaboration of the MaaS operator with all stakeholders is key. But what kind of stakeholders? You can see on this graph the ecosystem of the MaaS. So that goes from very core business to the whole business ecosystem, and it's really important to include and to collaborate with all those stakeholders. It is particularly important here where you see the regulators and the policymakers. So whether they are taking care of the platform or not, it's a particularly important one also because in Belgium, due to the specific context that we have a lot of political layers that need to collaborate, and also some intermediate layers that do not have, let's say, legal competencies as such, but that are key, such as provinces, the metropolis level, in Wallonia, the Bassin de Mobilité, but also in Flanders, the vervoerregio's. And then in this ecosystem, as I said in the definition, it's really important to focus on the customer, so really understand the mechanism that encourage the model shift, and that depends a lot of it on different factors such as age, where you come from, digital skills, and so on. And the MaaS must really have an added value over what it is now in terms of cost, convenience, and choice and personalization to ensure that there will be appropriation of the app. And some tend to say that in this context, the minimum level of integration would be 3 to make sure that in the long term people use it. So now let's move to the result of this little study. So how did we proceed? We have contacted either the elder men or elder women and the head of department of mobility department from all the cities in Belgium that either were capital of provinces or had more than 100,000 inhabitants. We have decided to do so because, as we see now around the world, these initiatives mainly develop in big cities for a matter of density, but also a matter of not only density of people, but also density of services. And out of this, so we have interviewed 8 representatives from Belgian cities. And in the case of Brussels, the representative redirected us toward the representative of the Brussels Capital Region because, again, linked to the specificities of Belgian governance, it made more sense to to discuss with someone at that level, also because there's currently an ongoing pilot, a MaaS pilot. And so we interviewed this person, but for the rest of the cities, we have decided to focus on the cities because there's not the same dynamic and ongoing pilot project at the regional level. So we have interviewed the cities first on the general perception. So what do they think MaaS is, to make sure that we're on the same page? What is their general perception of the concept? But also, what do they think are the prerequisites for it to work, either in the cities or in Belgium in general? And then we interviewed them on the practical implementation related to governance and management. So what do they think is the role of the private and the public sector? But also, what kind of management model would they see develop in the cities? In addition to those cities, we have also interviewed the representative of the 4 Belgian public transport operators, because, as we said earlier, public transport are kind of the backbone of MaaS, and we consider that they add an added value because they also have a different perspective from the cities, and we sensibly ask the same questions. I just would like to point that as every research, there are potential biases because even though all the people we talk to are well aware of the context of the local context, their opinion does not reflect an official position from the cities, and so there's also some space for subjectivity in the answers. So first, so you can see here that there's a small poll on your perception and your vision of MaaS. But what we could see is that the cities, the territories that we interviewed and public transport operators had generally a positive vision of MaaS because thanks to its ease of use, the territories consider that it's an opportunity to develop intermodality and simulate the use of sustainable modes, that it's also an opportunity to centralize and enhance existing offers and services. And a few of them also put forward that it's a complementary asset to existing policies, such as the Verve Regions or the Centrale de Mobilité. Public transport operators mainly put forward that it was an opportunity to reduce car use and achieve model shift. So we were a bit curious to know if you had a... So let's say that in the people that answered, you generally have a positive perception of MaaS as well. Even though all of the interviewees had a positive perception of it, it was also put forward that it should not be the ultimate solution to model transfer because it won't work, and also that there were some important prerequisites to its implementation. So what are those prerequisites? We have identified 6 of them, and I will present them, let's say, in a majority order, so in the number of times that they were mentioned. So the main prerequisite that was mentioned is the stakeholders' collaboration. First, within the administration itself, because it was put forward that currently there are still way too many silos between the departments that should work together in local authorities. More collaboration between different levels of power, so between the regions who have a lot of competencies and local authorities, but also that more needed to be done at intermediate level, so with the level of metropolises or provinces. And last but not least, that there should be more private-public collaboration to allow the development of MaaS. The second prerequisite that was put forward is the data availability and management. So first of all, to make sure that the different services would be able to communicate, so interoperability and standardization, and that the data that will come from these kind of apps will be toughly managed and stored. The third aspect that came from was more a financial aspect. So a number of territories have put forward that currently there's no clear economic model. So even though there are projects, it's is not sure yet how it can be rentable, and there's currently no clear business model how you can make money out of MaaS, and also that it represents a financial investment from the cities and that local authorities do not always have these needs. The fourth aspect that was put forward is the physical infrastructure. So firstly, that territories must ensure that the supply equals demand, because it's nice if all the informations are centralized on the platform, on an app, but we should make sure that it actually matches the modes that are available when you want to switch apps. Also, they need to develop an urbanism that favors soft modes and intermodality, such as cycling lanes and points where you can do intermodality, so Mobi points, for example. The fifth point was the adequate legislation. So a few interviews have put forward a lot of coherence between existing regulations and the reality of objectives. So, for example, in the case of tax matters or parking policies in some cities. And the last but not least was put forward was the inclusive approach, so that MaaS need to develop an inclusive manner to ensure that it's adopted beyond early adopters and convince people. Then, in the practical implementation of MaaS, we first asked, so what was the role of the private and public sectors? For the private sector, there's kind of a common vision on the point that they should be deploying and providing technical solutions. Why? Because first, they have the material and financial resources to ensure that there's a quality of services provided. And to specify, I just forgot to do that, but also what I wanted to say is deploy solutions apart from public transport. So that they have the material and financial resources to ensure the quality of the services. They have an expertise, especially in new mobility modes, to make sure that it's developed in an adequate and optimal way. They enjoy a decision-making flexibility that the public sector doesn't have, so that means that the innovation can also be faster. And last, they also have an access to data that allows them to have a continuous optimization and improvement of their services. When it comes to the role of the public sector, what was mainly put forward was that the public sector should act as a facilitator and or a coordinator. So the point that were put forward for more precision is they need to stimulate the exchange and collaboration between the different stakeholders around the table to give a political impetus, establish a vision and a legislative framework where potential private MaaS operators can come to operate. They should ensure the local and regional mobility objectives, make sure that they are actually respected and enforced. They should also act as an economic accelerator, so by sometimes financially supporting either mobility services but also citizens to give them incentives. That public authorities should also keep control and retain mobility data. And one interview also put forward that they should act as a field of experimentation for new mobility services. When it comes to the models, more specifically, first, it's interesting to see that out of the 9th territory interviewed, there are 6 of them that do not have a clear-cut opinion on the kind of model that they would prefer. So it's really interesting to see that there was no interview that put forward that they would like to rely solely on a public model. But you can see that Antwerp and Leuven are more interested in a private operator, but in a logic of enabling, so by developing a policy framework, so not in a logic of laissez-faire and not looking forward, so private but still with implication from the public sector. The cities of Bruges and Ghent were not sure whether they would prefer a private operator or hybrid model. but they would like a strong involvement from the private sector in a logic of efficacy and a ratio quality prices for the users in the territories. The cities of Hasselt and Liège say that they would prefer a hybrid model in a logic of strong public-private partnership. And it's interesting to see that in those two cases, they would like a hybrid model but that goes beyond really the city level. So Hasselt put forward that they would rather have a MaaS at the level of the province of Limburg, while Liège said that they would like to develop it at the level of Liège Metropole. Concerning the Brussels capital region, the person interrogated would like a hybrid, but with a strong presence from the regional authority to make sure that they keep access to the data and that they can watch the flux of mobility on the territory. In the case of Brussels, the capital region, as you may know, there's currently an ongoing pilot project where the STIB MFB was mandated to be the operator and coordinate it. For the city of Namur, they were not sure whether they wanted a public or a hybrid model, but what was really important for them is to ensure that they keep control over the existing infrastructure. And to end, in the case of the city of Charleroi, they have no precise ID, but they also want to keep the control of the mobility flux in and around the Charleroi metropole. When it comes to public transport operators, you can also see in that case that they had not clear-cut opinion in most cases. So in the case of the NMBS, and I think I saw that someone from there was here as well, so hi. The person we interviewed say that the model that should be developed is what fits the territory best, but that there should remain some control from public authorities to guarantee that sustainable goals and local objectives are achieved. In the case of the STIB, the interviewee wanted to see a public platform to ensure that public benefits and the fact that MaaS could remain inclusive and not just go for profit. The interlocutor from De Lijn is not sure, but the person does want to see a model developed that is only based on private enterprises, because it considered that public authorities should ensure that alternative modes to the car need to be developed. And the person at the TEC considered that the hybrid model would be easier to put in place for the user. Then we also asked the cities what role they thought that the regions would have, because even though we often see that the city level is central, regions do have a lot of legal competencies. So we wanted to know how complementary do they think they can be, and they must be. So we've seen that the questions the answers were various. Some, let's say, very low participation, so more in a awareness raising logic, to a strong presence with coordination. So in the case of the city of Antwerp, they consider that the region should help to physically integrate the mobility and to reinforce the digital transition over the territory. The city of Leuven considered that the region should help to raise awareness of MaaS, but also bring some support, especially to the Vervoer regions that have a low people density and low human financial capacities. The city of Hasselt considered that the region should help to develop a Flemish region on smart mobility, so not only on MaaS, but more generally on smart mobility, and act as an economic actor, for example, to develop large-scale public-private partnership. The city of Liège has put forward that they would like the region to centralize the initiatives to make sure that it's replicable, and also that the region should help by buying data sets for territories. The city of Bruges say that the region should help develop a regional MaaS vision and choose the kind of services that would be included in MaaS apps, and also provide financial support. The city of Charleroi put forward that they would like the region to initiate and coordinate this type of apps on its territory. Oh, I forgot again, but again say that in general the region should be a general coordinator. And for Namur, they say that the region should coordinate important public-private partnerships, especially when it comes to ticket integrations, and ensure the deployment of MaaS at a larger scale. In this case, I didn't mention Brussels Capital Region because they're a regional authority, but the person that we interviewed said that in the other way, they're also collaborating a lot with municipalities of the territory to ensure that everybody is on the same page on this. We also asked public transport operators what they thought as the level was the more appropriate for the development. So we did not interview them with the previous question because in some way there are public authorities at the regional level, but we asked them based on their activity and how they see it, what is the most pertinent level of implementation. So the person at the NMBS say that they consider that either it would be done at the city level or the regional level, but if at the regional level with a good understanding of local issues. The person at the lane say that it would make more sense to do it at the regional level or at the federal level, because the federal and regional level reflects more the reality of everyday moves. So numbers of people live in a city in Flanders or Wallonia, but do work in Brussels, so it would make more sense. But the person agreed that it was complicated because private transport operators usually first operate and develop at the city level. The person at the TEC said that it should be done at the city level because the city has an own ecosystem, but that the regions must create conditions to the development of MaaS. And the person for the case of Brussels, there's an ongoing project, as I say, at the Brussels Capital Region level with the STIB mandating, and they consider that it's an appropriate scale. Oh, and I forgot the survey. So I was also a bit curious to know what do you think, so based on what we said and maybe the links that you have had before, what do you think is the most relevant level of deployment for MaaS in Belgium? And I'll leave a few minutes. I think we can end it here. I had some answer. So we see here that there's quite a tendency for the regional level, and I think it's interesting to see also that there's no common answer, and that's good, let's say, for the ongoing dialogues. So what can we conclude from this, let's say, short but really intense presentation with a lot of elements in it? First, that the 9 territories interviewed and the public transport operators generally have a positive perception of MaaS, that they see it as an asset for either accessibility and or model transfers in the future, but that MaaS should not be the only tool to encourage a model transfer. The second point is that there have been a number of identified prerequisites, but of very various nature. And then to overcome those, we should develop a holistic approach, including various disciplines. Coming to the practical implementation, we can say that there is generally a common vision on the role of private and public sectors, so that the private sector should be in charge of deploying mobility solutions apart from public transport, and that the public sector should act as a facilitator or coordinator. But coming to the concrete management and governance model, there's no common vision. There's also no common vision on the level of implementation. We can see that there's a slight tendency toward hybrid models. What comes out is that we can claim that in Belgium, there's no will in any cities to work on a laissez-faire basis, mostly to ensure the development of local objective and sustainability objectives. And to finish, that the involvement of the region is strongly desired by cities in a way or another. To conclude, let's say that there's a lot of enthusiasm around the topic, a lot of aspects that we need to dig into in management and governance, but not only. And it's curious to see beyond this that some consider that it's only the start of MaaS, while others considers that it's harder to put in place than expected, and that we went beyond some kind of hype at the moment. So yes, let's say that MaaS is still a topic that needs to be talked about, and of course we also remain available and open to research partnership and collaboration on the topics with a focus on management and governance.